The marble walls of the Palatine Hill shimmered in the moonlight, their white surfaces glowing like the bones of some ancient god. Beyond those towering columns, past the golden statues and the perfumed halls, the Emperor Caligula ruled not as a man but as something far more dangerous, a god who had forgotten that he was ever mortal. His palace was a temple to pleasure and madness, and within its walls Rome itself began to lose its soul. In the day, the palace glistened with the symbols of divine power. At night it breathed sin. Servants whispered that once the torches were lit and the doors locked, the air inside grew heavy with the scent of wine and the sound of laughter that turned to screams. What began as celebration always ended as spectacle, because in Caligula's Rome there was no line between entertainment and cruelty. They said his eyes burned brighter than the lamps that lined his halls. He could shift from charm to fury in a single breath. To serve him was to walk a narrow edge between ecstasy and death. The senators bowed, the generals obeyed, and the people cheered, not out of love, but out of fear of the man who believed the gods themselves envied him. Caligula had inherited an empire of laws and turned it into a playground of whims. Every corner of his palace told a story of indulgence taken too far. Gold dripped from the ceilings, fountains poured not with water, but with wine, and feasts stretched until dawn with music, dancers, and the endless parade of those who sought his favour. Yet beneath the luxury lay a growing sense of horror, because every gift he gave, every pleasure he offered, came with a price no one dared to pay. In those candlelit chambers, men and women learned that the emperor's affection could become his cruelty in the blink of an eye. The same hands that poured wine could just as easily point to the executioner. And still they came, because to be seen by Caligula was to be touched by power itself. To be ignored was to vanish. If you wish to uncover more stories like this, stories that reveal the darkness behind Rome's golden mask, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because history is not only written in marble and glory, but in the madness that empires try to erase. Caligula's madness began with grief. When his beloved sister Drusilla died, something inside him broke beyond repair. He declared her a goddess, built temples in her name, and demanded sacrifices in her honour. He wept for her in public, but his mourning soon twisted into obsession. He began to see divinity in death, and death became his favourite companion. He began to dress as the gods, Jupiter, Apollo, Venus, changing his robes as easily as his moods. He ordered that his statue be placed in temples beside theirs. He commanded the people of Rome to worship him, not as emperor, but as deity. The priests obeyed, the Senate obeyed. No one dared question a man who could make gods out of mortals and corpses alike. His palace became a city within a city, where no law existed but his own. The guards were his shadows, his ministers his puppets. At his feasts he would have senators dine beside prisoners, nobles beside slaves. He believed it amused the gods to see men forget who they were. One night he ordered that the tables be turned. Literally. Those who had once sat in honour found themselves feeding the very slaves who once served them. And when laughter filled the room, Caligula smiled, as if he had just reminded Rome who truly ruled. His cruelty was theatrical, deliberate and always watched. He once invited the priest of Jupiter to a banquet, then asked him to dance naked for the gods. When the man refused, Caligula had him dragged to the courtyard and executed, declaring that the gods demanded better entertainment. The crowd laughed because they had to. In Rome, laughter had become another form of survival. He loved to play with fate. In the arena, he would gesture to the crowd, asking if the defeated should live or die. The people would shout their answer, but he would always choose the opposite. Because for Caligula, the greatest pleasure was proving that no will but his mattered. He was not a man of justice or mercy. He was a man who measured power by how easily he could destroy it. His nights were a carnival of chaos, the palace filled with wine, music, and bodies moving through the corridors like shadows in a fever dream. Nobles offered their daughters to his service, hoping to secure his favour. Senators pretended to laugh at his cruel jokes, their eyes hollow behind their smiles. He would kiss his guests on the cheek, then whisper that they would die before sunrise, and sometimes they did. He once declared that he could make anyone in Rome rich, all ruined in a single day, and he proved it. He invited a wealthy merchant to his palace, offered him a seat at his table, and praised his loyalty. Then in front of everyone he demanded the man's fortune as a gift to the gods. When the merchant hesitated, Caligula ordered his execution and had his wealth distributed among the guests as an offering to himself. The crowd cheered through gritted teeth, pretending gratitude as they tasted their own terror. Caligula believed fear was a form of art. He painted with it, shaped it, and lived within it. To him, cruelty was not chaos, but creation. He once said that the gods made men mortal because they envied suffering, that pain was the only proof that life was real. And so he created pain wherever he went, believing that he was bringing the divine closer to earth. But even gods grow paranoid. Caligula began to see betrayal in every corner. He accused his guards of plotting against him, his advisors of poisoning his food, his friends of conspiring in silence. The more he ruled through fear, the more he was consumed by it. The palace of sin that had once echoed with laughter began to echo with suspicion. Every footstep sounded like conspiracy. Every whisper carried death. Outside the palace, the people of Rome murmured in secret. They had once loved him, the young emperor who had freed prisoners, ended taxes, and promised a golden age. But now they feared him more than famine or war. Senators began to meet in shadows. Generals swore loyalty in public and betrayal in private. The empire had given birth to a monster, and it was only a matter of time before that monster turned on itself. The marble corridors that once led to feasts now led to graves. The fountains that once poured wine now ran red. And still Caligula laughed, surrounded by beauty, haunted by ghosts. The whispers that filled the streets of Rome no longer spoke his name in reverence, but in dread. The man once hailed as the new dawn of the empire had become its nightmare. Inside his palace, the scent of decay lingered beneath the perfume, and the laughter that echoed through the marble halls sounded hollow, almost rehearsed. Those who once came to bask in the emperor's favour now came because they feared not to. Caligula's descent had no single moment of madness. It was a slow unravelling, a fever that spread from his soul into the city itself. He believed the gods whispered to him in the stillness of night, commanding him to blur every line between man and beast, between pleasure and pain, between sacred and profane. The palace became their theatre, he their actor, their high priest, their victim. He began to hold feasts that lasted for days, each one stranger than the last. One night he commanded that every dish be laced with gold flakes, so that his guests might taste the wealth of Rome. Another night he made senators crawl on all fours beneath the tables, while his concubines threw grapes at them, laughing as the most powerful men in the empire barked like dogs. When one senator hesitated, Caligula struck him with a goblet and declared him unfit to serve Rome's divine ruler. The man's body was dragged away, and the feast continued as if nothing had happened. The emperor began to see himself not as a ruler of men, but as a god among mortals. He constructed bridges of boats across the Bay of Baiae so that he could walk on water, ordering his legions to stand in formation upon the decks as he crossed in golden armour. When priests begged him to show humility, he laughed and said the sea itself obeyed him. For Caligula, faith had become a mirror that reflected only his own madness. The Palace of Sin was not merely a place of indulgence, it was a machine designed to remind every soul within it that their lives belonged to him. He would summon senators' wives and daughters to his chambers and then boast publicly about what he had done, daring their husbands to object. None did. He would whisper the names of those he intended to destroy during the feasts, forcing his victims to sit through the night smiling, knowing death awaited them at dawn. He delighted in the theatre of fear, in the trembling faces that looked to him for mercy that never came. The walls of the palace absorbed every secret, every scream, every whispered prayer. Servants learned to walk silently, eyes lowered, hands trembling as they poured his wine or dressed him in silk. To spill a drop was to die. To speak his name without praise was treason. He had turned the imperial household into an empire of shadows, where everyone watched everyone else, and no one slept without dreaming of knives. Caligula's cruelty reached beyond his palace. He turned Rome itself into his stage. He demanded that temples once dedicated to Jupiter and Mars be rededicated to him. Statues of gods were altered so that their faces bore his own. He even ordered that the heads of divine icons be replaced with his likeness, claiming that Olympus had been reborn in his image. The people wept, but their tears were quiet. He emptied the imperial treasury to fund his visions. Gold that once secured armies was melted for banquets. Ships were transformed into floating pleasure gardens, sailing down the Tiber with dancers, slaves, and wild animals. He built lavish theatres where he forced the audience to watch plays that ended with real executions. Art became agony. Spectacle became sacrifice. Yet even as his power grew, so did his fear. He began to sleep with guards stationed at his door, changing rooms every night, convinced that daggers waited in the dark. He accused his own family of plotting against him, his sisters, his cousins, his generals. Those who had once raised him now begged for their lives before the same man they had called child. The gods he had once worshipped had become voices in his mind, demanding blood as proof of his devotion. Rome endured because it always did, but beneath the marble, cracks began to spread. The Senate seethed in silence, its members humiliated, its authority stripped bare. The Praetorian Guard, his protectors, grew weary of serving a god who could not be trusted to spare them, and still the city played along, terrified, waiting for someone else to act. Then came the winter of his undoing. During a festival celebrating his divinity, Caligula entered the theatre in golden armour, his face painted white like a statue. He proclaimed himself both emperor and god, lord of life and death. He demanded sacrifices in his honour, not of animals, but of men. The crowd roared with forced applause, but the guards who watched from the shadows said nothing. They had seen enough. In the early hours of a cold January morning in 41 AD, as Caligula walked through a narrow passage beneath his palace, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He turned, perhaps expecting another servant, another admirer. Instead, he saw the faces of the men he had mocked, humiliated, and threatened. The blades flashed once, twice, then again. The emperor who had thought himself a god fell to the marble floor, mortal after all. The palace that had once pulsed with sin fell silent. The torches burned low, casting long shadows across the walls that had witnessed his madness. Outside, the city stirred to the news. Caligula, the god of Rome, was dead. Some mourned in fear, most rejoiced in secret. The Senate declared him a tyrant, his memory damned, his statues torn down and melted. His name became a curse whispered in the dark. But the palace remained. For years after, servants swore they heard his laughter echo through the corridors at night, that his shadow still moved among the pillars where he once feasted. Rome tried to erase him, but some stains cannot be washed away. His reign had shown the empire what happened when absolute power was given to a man who believed himself divine. Caligula's Rome was a mirror, reflecting not only his madness but the fragility of human restraint. Behind every empire's golden mask lies the same hunger for pleasure, for power, for control. His palace was more than a place of sin. It was a warning carved in marble, a reminder that civilization and chaos are separated only by a single man's desire. History remembers him as a monster, but monsters are not born from nothing. They are built, fed by the silence of those who fear to speak, by the obedience of those who would rather survive than resist. Caligula did not destroy Rome, he revealed it. He showed that even the greatest empire in history could be seduced by its own reflection. And so his palace stands not just as a ruin, but as a lesson. that pleasure without purpose becomes corruption, that faith without humility becomes madness, and that the line between God and man, once crossed, leads only to ruin. If this story made you see the glory of Rome in a darker light, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because the world remembers its empires for their beauty, but it forgets the shadows that kept that beauty alive. And those are the stories we are here to tell.